Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Think Tank. Well, it looks like the Affordable Health Care Act has been ruled constitutional by the Supreme Court and will go into effect. You know, it's kind of interesting how they call it the Affordable Health Care Act, even though it's anything but affordable. I mean, first of all, 30 more million people will be coming into the system in this healthcare bill. Illegal immigrants will be coming into the system. They're not going to be paying for it. How is this going to be funded? All these extra people coming into healthcare, they need to be taken care of. There already are doctor shortages, okay? More medical equipment is going to be needed. Medicine is going to be needed. It's going to cost more money, okay? So how are the costs going to go down? It just doesn't make sense. Now, you have to also add to that there is no discrimination against pre-existing conditions. Now, what does that mean? Ordinarily, people that have pre-existing conditions are more at risk, therefore they pay more insurance. But now, less money is going to come in. So again, how is it going to be funded if less money is coming in? How can costs go down if costs will be higher? More medicine is needed to treat the extra patients, the extra people that are coming into the system. Okay? And of course, if less money is coming in to pay for it, costs will go up. I mean, it's plain and simple. How is this an Affordable Health Care Act? And then you have to understand, what about the quality of healthcare? Let's just look at the emergency room level of healthcare. I mean, have you been to an emergency room lately? Jam-packed. Jam-packed. I mean, in certain cases, you're lucky if you can even find a place to sit. And you got people coughing on you sometimes. Who knows what else you can pick up while just being there for something else. So it's really bad as it is. Now think about this. 30 more million people coming into the system. Imagine what emergency rooms are going to look like then. And what about doctors? You know, if there's less money coming into the system, you know, what's the incentive to become a doctor? I would think less. Okay? It's a lot of work. Med school costs money. A lot of them graduate. They're in debt. By the time they start working, all right, they have a lot of bills to pay. With this healthcare system, this Affordable Health Care Act, government's involved, bureaucrats go between the doctor and patient relationship, and more forms to fill out. It's just going to cost more money, and it's more of a headache. I mean, that's what's going to happen here. So you have the cost and also the quality. I mean, the cost is going to go up, quality is going to go down. And, you know, there's something else you got to understand here. In the bill, if the person decides not to buy it, they can pay a penalty. And it was called a tax by the Supreme Court. Now think about this. The tax, as it is right now, I mean, it seems that the tax is going to be lower than having to buy the insurance. So there are people that might just pay the tax and not buy the insurance. All right? And they'll buy it when they get sick. That's the whole thing. You know, why buy it for if a person is not sick? They could just pay the tax, which is less, and they'll only buy it when they get sick. So it's going to defeat the purpose of insurance. And of course, like I said, less money comes into the system. And costs will go up. Again, I don't see how it's affordable. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. So, you know, that's the healthcare bill itself. Now let's talk about the Supreme Court decision. What they did was, instead of striking this down, which they should have done, they redefined it and called it a tax. I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, if there's intent, if there's legislation or a law has to be passed by the government, and there's a dispute about it, so it goes to the Supreme Court, and they are supposed to rule if it's constitutional or not. I mean, that's it. You don't redefine something. You have to look at the intent, and you have to look at the legislation itself. You don't look at the consequence of not doing it, and then say, based on the consequence of not doing it, it is therefore constitutional. because the consequence for not doing it is a tax, and the tax is constitutional. So that is wrong. You have to. They should look at the intent. You don't look at the consequence for not doing it. So maybe they should just, throw this back to the Supreme Court and say, hey, yeah, we know the tax is, we know that a tax is constitutional, but we would like you to rule on the health care bill itself, the mandate to make people buy insurance by the government. Is that constitutional? So they should kick it right back up to the Supreme Court and say, hey, rule on the constitutionality of the intent. The tax has nothing to do with the intent. The tax is a consequence for not buying the insurance. So they should send it right back up again. I don't know what is the deal with that Supreme Court justice who came out and said that. And here's another thing. What's really goofy about the whole thing is that the Supreme Court ruled on something which is just unbelievable and has never been done in this country. They ruled that if Americans don't buy something that the government wants them to buy, they're going to be taxed. So Americans are being taxed for not doing something. Is that a tax? It's not, according to the Constitution. The Constitution talks about direct and indirect taxes. But Americans are being taxed on not buying something. So what's goofy about the whole thing is that the Supreme Court, although using this to say that the health care bill is constitutional, even though, like I mentioned before, they didn't really rule on the actual health care bill. They ruled on saying it's a tax by trying to redefine it. So it should be kicked back just to rule on the intent itself to say, hey, Americans have to buy health care. It could also be kicked back to the Supreme Court to say that this is not a tax, because taxes, according to the Constitution, have to be direct or indirect. So it could be kicked back to the Supreme Court to rule on the constitutionality of this penalty or this tax or whatever it is to Americans for not purchasing something. So that's what's really crazy about this whole thing as well. But here's the interesting thing. I wanted to make a point here, and this is politically. He called it a tax. Now, if you remember, the president was asked about it, and he said it's not a tax. So this whole thing is really interesting. Politically, it's like a double-edged sword. I mean, the Democrats, the president, they can claim victory. They can say, hey, look, we now have universal health care. Those Republicans, they try to strike it down. And the Supreme Court agreed with us. They ruled that it's constitutional. Right? But the problem for them is that while ruling it constitutional, they also ruled it a tax. Now think about this. This is an election year. What are things politicians don't want? Well, the incumbent doesn't want during an election year. A very bad economy, which we're in right now, and Americans to be told that they're going to be taxed more. And the other thing is, it's an unpopular bill. I mean, a lot of people don't like this. And on top of that, they're being taxed. And they're being taxed for something. They're being taxed for not wanting to buy something. I mean, it's bothering a lot of people. So I just wanted to make that point. So anyway, I would like you to weigh in on this. What do you think about the health care bill? What do you think about the Supreme Court decision? Please leave your comments. Please subscribe. And thank you for tuning in.